people are going to be trickling in.
Cool.
It's after lunch, so.
Yep.
I'm going to grab it.
Okay, I know it's after lunch and it's hard to get going, but we're going to continue on with the afternoon. So the next speaker is Scott Colby, and he is an advisor to the craft beverage industry, empowering owners and managers to capture new sales using high-performance brand marketing. His passion for craft is contagious, having worked in wine, spirits, and beer, both in communication and production. He learned best practices for standing out in a crowded market using digital, social, public relations, events, and storytelling channels. So Scott's got a lot of insight, and I think he's done a specific study in Nebraska, so he's got some unique insights to share with you guys. So here's Scott.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to use the mic.
You don't want it?
Yeah, I can.
I'll leave that.
Appreciate it. It's off, right?
Yeah, it's off.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I'm not going to use the mic. Let me know if I need to turn it up or turn it down a little bit. I was so stoked when Katie and Gabby asked me to present at your conference. And so I really want to thank you, and I want to thank the Nebraska Craft Brewers Guild. What a huge opportunity. And I'll be completely transparent up front. If you've ever presented in front of a group or you present in front of your company, there's always that critical moment. You think, well, they want me to present on marketing, and that's easy for me. I could talk about it all day. But how do you open up a presentation about marketing to people who don't know you? I'm from California. Actually, I'm from the Midwest, but temporarily I live in California right now. So how do you open that presentation up? And you're always looking for some sort of inspiration. And I kid you not, it happened yesterday when Josh presented on maximizing the value of your local product, right? And so he and I had this quick conversation afterwards, and I just said, man, it makes so much sense. You have that relationship with the brewer, and it's such that you've got good open communications. You're able to talk about the hops. You're able to talk about the beer. Well, you've got a model. You look for knowing the farmer, knowing the farm, knowing the hops. And I said, so flip it around for me. Tell me about a hop grower looking for a brewer with the potential of that kind of relationship, right? Because we're mainly brewers here, but the same thing is true about hop marketing. They want to find the brewer that's going to give them the relationship that Stephen gave to Josh, right? Everybody wants that. And so he said, wow, okay. What I would say is that you want to know the brewery, you want to know the brewer, and you want to know the beer. So if a hop grower to say, I'm entering into this relationship, that's the kind of interview they would want to have. Because if you've got a quality brewer who knows his or her stuff, you've got a brewery that's well organized, it's easy to see what they stand for, what they're going for, and the beer is killer. I mean, that's a relationship a hop grower would want to get into. And so I thought, okay, starting out my presentation today, I'm going to ask you to think about marketing differently. Because really, a lot of people would put marketing into a bucket. We know the brewer, we know the brewery, and we know the beer, but a lot of times marketing is just this thing. It's one thing in a bucket. It's kind of confusing to me, and I don't really have time for it, or I don't have the money for it, or I don't have the person or people who need to actually execute marketing, so I'm going to put it into one bucket. Sometimes that bucket's the trash can. We don't like to see that in the trash can, but what I would encourage you to take a look at is just how marketing can work for you. And all of these things you can do yourself. It's like Jamie and in the storytelling conversation yesterday, right? It's a lot of do-it-yourselfers because like Jeremy and I were talking about, craft was built on do-it-yourself. So all the tools I'm going to share with you today, you can take back and immediately use at your brewery to drive traffic to your tasting room, increase your engagement with your customers, and capture new sales. So these are some of the different aspects of marketing that you may or may not be familiar with or comfortable with. Public relations. Hey, we just had a brand new beer launch. Why don't you tell the local media about it, right? Free advertising. Plus, human interest stories. Sales promotion. Everybody knows this, especially if you're at retail. How key is this? Packaging, shelf space, pricing. I mean, craft is competitive to be sure, but the pricing model has to be such that you're approachable too. I think we're nearing the point where a $13 to $18 six-pack just isn't really going to make it at retail, right? Then you've got branding. Everybody has great brands around here. However, the brand stories might not be so clear to people. They're very clear to us. I started home brewing in my basement. Then I started a brewery. Okay, well that's a story, but you can take it further. Why do you brew? That's part of who you are. That's reflected in your packaging, your logo, your website. It's your brand. Events. I mean, getting in front of the people is so important. We're going to talk a little bit later, too, about just having stages for your product to really shine. Sponsorship, you all get hit with donation requests. I get it. Would you please contribute beer to my local nonprofit? And choosing the right ones can be a strategic advantage to you. Collaborations exposes your beer to some other brewery or group of breweries' audience, which gives you an immediate source of new customers. I know I don't need to tell you this, but I love collaborations for that reason. I think just you need to use them strategically and sparingly. Print, broadcast, digital, and social. Most everybody focuses their time, and correspondingly, a lot of the dollars end up right here. Social is very hot right now. I'm encouraging you to perhaps think about it strategically and not in terms of volume. Not everything that you take from your camera phone necessarily deserves to be up on your social media. Digital is very important because people want to discover your brands. They want to see you mobily. If you don't have a mobile website at this point, see me afterwards because there's a real issue there. You need to be mobile first, especially for a younger consumer. And then print and broadcast. Generally, I don't lean that way. Broadcast is still pretty high in terms of dollar spend, but we've got print opportunities in local media, which are very valuable. So instead of really looking at marketing as a single bucket, I'm encouraging you to look more broadly than that. Anything that touches the customer is a potential marketing opportunity for you that you can control, which is really marketing your craft. And these are the folks that you're looking for. We love the idea of camaraderie and what community a brewery brings together, right? Well, I want to have social moments that I can share with my friends at your brewery. We need to figure out the way to enable that when they're on site, but spend even more time getting them there in the beginning. So what we're going to walk through today, and I certainly appreciate you folks being here, we're going to talk about a little bit about my background, which you got from Katie. We're going to talk about the different aspects of really marketing that you can control, and then we'll end with some next steps. And anytime during the presentation, if something grabs you, if you feel like you really want to talk about something, ask, and then we'll definitely have room at the end for further questions. My background, it's kind of weird, but what I did was basically follow a bunch of brands that I was excited about. I started out, I cut my teeth in software, and that really gave me an appreciation for the digital aspect of marketing, the digital opportunity that exists. I went on to work for Tradeshow Wines, which was just about as left field as possible, but I was able to work with some of the best wineries in the US and globally, and I was able to help connect with their customers by way of loyalty and wine clubs, which gave me yet a different perspective on, here's a passionate winemaker, just like a passionate brewer, and how do you give the story of the passionate winemaker directly to the customer? How do you create that connection? And then how do you foster it so they join the wine club year after year? They make visits to the tasting room, in your case, the tap room. Jim Beam, it was a party. It was a lot of fun, honestly. You're talking about scaling up the number of brands and the amount of money exponentially from wine to Jim Beam. I was working with some of the biggest distilled spirits, wines, and other brands in the world, which was killer. I mean, how could you argue with that? What it taught me was how we have to look at scale, how we have to actually approach our business when we get to that level of growth. And they didn't have, not all of their brands were at the level of a Jim Beam Black or a Jim Beam White Label. There were a lot of growth brands. So how you could position for the long-term 3 to 5 year plan of a small brand to start to scale up to those levels. Small batch bourbons getting now the notoriety that they're getting. Again, very strategic, very deliberate on their part. Oakley was a ton of fun. I was down in SoCal for a bunch of years. What I learned at Oakley is you have a stage. These athletes that were using the Oakley products were the ambassadors. They were the marketers of the brand. And if you see Shaun White wearing an Oakley goggle, you're going to buy an Oakley goggle, because if it works for Shaun White, chances are good it works for me. Now, of course, that came with a premium price point, but Oakley was that iconic brand that people went after. They weren't always that way. They built up. We're starting to see some brands emerge in craft space that are becoming iconic on a similar trajectory to Oakley. I worked for BJ's Restaurants, which was also a good time. It was my first time in the service industry. I had never waited tables in high school or college, but getting into the service industry gave me a completely different perspective about marketing and loyalty, transactions, families coming in, wanting just a good sit-down meal, and then leaving. How do you create loyalty with that kind of relationship? How do you break their pattern of going to an Applebee's or some other lower tier restaurant? Again, a very valuable piece of my background. Before I got to Sierra Nevada, which, I mean, in this space, just iconic again in the way that Ken Grossman helped to shape the industry. You can't have anything but respect for the man. And I was inspired to work for him. And I had a good run with them before I really started my own marketing and craft, because the opportunity to share what I've learned in this path with the common thread of creating sales and loyalty in each of these different industries, I feel like those tools aren't available to you folks. And I want to share that, because when you're a craft brewer, what little I know about it, craft brewer starts a business, there's no blueprint, there's no roadmap. You might have mentors, you might have best practices, but it's really still very Wild West in the way that you go about it. Marketing doesn't seem to be part of the playbook for most of the craft brewers that are just starting out in years 1 to 5 right now. So giving you the opportunity to have those very same tools that each of these iconic brands have had, that seemed like an opportunity for me to share. And also I have 10 ounces of credibility, because when I was at BJ's, not only was I marketing, but I helped open up a brewery in Temple, Texas. Temple, Texas, if you're familiar, is like the armpit of Texas, right between Austin and Waco. And I spent a good time there. It was a year and a half as an assistant brewer. I did it because I thought, if I'm going to be credible at all talking to craft brewers in the future, not knowing that I was going to work for Sierra Nevada or be speaking to you today, I should pretty much know how to brew it. Because home brewing is great, but brewing commercially is completely different. So starting a brewery from scratch, I have a little bit of that background, along with the team of folks. We had an amazing time with all the ups and downs and the learnings and the presentations that we've seen today about compliance and OSHA, and all those things were very real for us as well, in addition to budgeting and distribution, because this was then projected to be the central distribution point for all of BJ's produced beers. And if you're familiar with BJ's restaurant, the concept, there are about 180 of them nationwide now. They've expanded beyond the West Coast. They were mainly in California and Texas, and when I was in Texas, there were 35 in the state. So this was a central point, very strategically located in the middle of Texas, just for that reason. Good learnings. So I really titled this presentation, Marketing with Voice and Vigor. And voice, without a microphone, you obviously understand that I can belt it out. But the vigor piece of it might not be quite so clear. Why vigor? So if you were to look at the definition of vigor, we're talking about active bodily or mental strength, healthy, well-balanced growth, intensity of action or effect, force, and effective legal status. And I thought, all right, so this is a great backdrop to what I really wanted to present today. 3 or 4 components of a successful craft brewing marketing strategy. So we're going to go through each one of those right now. Starting off with finding your voice, planning for growth, marketing with intensity, and keeping it legal. Nobody really likes to talk about the last one, but it's going to be vital that we keep it in mind, especially when we're starting to do more aggressive marketing, and we'll find out why. So everybody's got this story, right? It's started brewing in the garage or the basement, and that is a strong story. That is what built craft. But it's not your brand story. The origin story is great, but it's history. The brand story is future. It's where you're going as a brewery. This is what people want to see. And what you're going to see in my presentation is the difference between what everybody else is saying and what you need to say to stand out. Because like Jeremy and I were talking about, it's about being differentiated. And you have, as Neil said, 49 breweries in the state of Nebraska. Imagine a future state where that's 100. It's not far off. The market is crowded. I can't emphasize that enough. You need to have a voice that cuts through the clutter of that market. So we're going to talk about how. What is your mission? What do you stand for? What are your brand values? We heard this a little bit yesterday when Neil was also talking about what is your beer? He was referencing wheat beer. What are the characteristics that define your beer? Well, I would challenge you, what are the characteristics that define your brewery? Sometimes these are heady conversations, best talked about over a pint of beer. I get it. However, try to see how important these things, when strung together, form the basis, the blueprint of your marketing strategy. I'm not suggesting specific vehicles. I'm not up here selling social media versus print or broadcast. I'm trying to help you see that these 3 or 4 things show a customer that wants to discover you for themselves, shows them the things, exposes the aspects of your brewery that they want to line up with. People wear breweries as badges nowadays. How many times can I check in on Untapped? So if you make it easy for them to see who you are, even better, because they're going to see, that's a brewery I can stand behind. Not only do I like their beer, I like their story. Not only do I like their story, I'm going to tell my friends. Again, you get one customer? No, I suggest you get a whole slew of new customers just because you're taking the time now to articulate some of these things. Be purposeful and deliberate. So I'm not going to suggest that everybody's got this level of purpose. I think craft brewing in general, we start to hear things like sustainability. We don't want to negatively impact our environment. We want to be positive contributors to our community. See, these are value statements. These are purposes. Now, Tom's goes one step further, obviously, for the one-for-one. Buy a pair of shoes, and a pair of shoes is donated to somebody in need. Now, this is something that has built their business. Just pause when you have some time to think what you stand for. It might give you an opportunity to actually line up with the community in a bigger way than you have previously. It might help you to find a local charity that means something or boost your sustainability efforts. Breaking new ground. Sierra Nevada, back in the late 70s, 1980, they were just tired of flavorless beers. So why don't I throw a hop in there? Why don't I get that bitterness, that taste isn't really out in the market yet? So they leaned into it. They had 2 or 3 products to start, and now look where they are. They've helped to define an industry. And Ken Grossman, if you've met him, his entire family are just the most humble, giving people that you've ever met. A very special place in my heart working with Sierra Nevada. The idea is they were revolutionary. Now we're at a point in craft's lifespan that we might not necessarily have that same opportunity to be revolutionary, but you could really own categories. You could define yourself by the products that you develop. And I would even bring this example in from our friends at Scriptown. Now, this on the website would, of course, say that they lean into sessionable beers. And I had a spiced Tripel the other day at the Hop Cup, which wasn't necessarily sessionable, but it was delicious. So I would ask the folks at Scriptown, and I would suggest to you folks that here is a statement from a brewery that wants to be known as something, wants to really define their niche in a growing, crowded 49 brewery market. Now, to the extent that they let this dictate their products that they tap and distribute, maybe not. But at some point in time, they strategically said, you know what, flavorful sessionable beers, which I would completely agree with, especially with lagers still being 75% of the general market, right? Sessionable beers with flavor is probably something that's going to be around for a while. And so they get a little bit of a bump from first mover advantage in the market by defining themselves that way. Transparency. So when we're talking with Jamian and Nathan yesterday about the videotaping, taking video with your phone of what's going on in your brewery or an event that you went to or some type of activity and sharing it, you're opening the doors for customers to love you, to line up with what you're doing because, wow, it looks like they're having fun. It looks like it's not a behind the curtain, nobody can enter. We're going to be completely transparent about who we are, why we're doing it, because we want you to know. Customers nowadays want to know. I don't care if it's brewing or grocery or dining out. They want to know what's in their food. They want to know the beer they're drinking. I still don't think they're right at the point where they want to be completely geeked out, educated about it. You don't need to over-educate them on the hops and the process. I still think that's a ways off, but they want to know who you are and who they're buying from. That's best way of giving yourself an opportunity for not only your first visit from them, but repeat visits. Oakley was great at this because we talked about these global stages that they had for their athletes who would just shine and create these highly visible stages for Oakley branding. So how about our friends at Benson? Now, the little I know, again, first time visiting the Lincoln area, been to Omaha quite a bit. Benson on the website and social media really takes pride in the photos. They want people to see what it's like to be at the brewery. And whether or not this was intentional, it was genius, because what they're doing is they're giving people the tools they need to see themselves sitting at the bar. This is what I can expect when I go there. Geez, everything's beautiful, it's open, we've got maybe even an opportunity for a tour. So taking a little bit of time, and these were very professionally done. If it was amateur, they're beautiful. The photos were very deliberate, and they really give a great idea of what you're going to get when you get to Benson. I would offer up to you that transparency moving forward is 100% more valuable than catchy campaign slogans and high budget anything marketing-wise, because people are a little more critical than that nowadays. They see through heavy-handed advertising. They'd rather see the behind the scenes for themselves, because they're not going to have you make the decision for them. They're going to make the decision for themselves. I'm talking a lot. Are we doing all right? Everybody's still awake, which is good after lunch. Looking 3 to 5 years out, I struggle with this. Actually, I know in my heart, in my experience, that this is where you folks need to be. From a marketing perspective, you need to have a plan. And I know you do. I know you have plans. You've thought about this. You've talked to the other investors, the other owners. You get this. But I don't think it's nearly as formal as it should be. So, with that said, I challenge you, again, I'll challenge you a lot. I challenge you to think about things. Take a day, find some time, carve out a day where you're not brewing to actually put time against these types of conversations with the others on your team. Where are we going to be 3 to 5 years from now? What does that look like from a volume perspective? Maybe I'm thinking about a second location. Are we going to expand our product line? Are we going to go into new territories where we know the trends are headed because we're very hyper aware of where things are going? Let's be first to market with some of those new entrants. Think in terms of 3 to 5 years out, but act daily, because we're all reacting. We have a problem here, and we have a great brew day here, and we have to dump a bunch of barrels. I get it. You're worried about today. In the back of your mind, always have tomorrow, because there's a chance a year from now or 2 years from now, if you haven't thought about it, it'll creep up on you and get the better of you. Other people are thinking about it. If you're not, your product will not market itself for more than 2 years. It's a fact. You have customers that are locals at your bar. He or she may sit at the very same countertop. I get it, but there will be a point in time where that predictable income that you've had for the first 2 years of your existence will not be a thing. So, 3 to 5 years out. And invest in marketing as an asset. Think about it like a piece of equipment. You folks are keen on expanding, I get it. And boy, it's easy to see that I buy a new tank and I'll be able to get this much volume out of it. 1 for 1. Well, marketing's a little squishier than that. I will not debate that. However, If you think about it as an asset, like you think about a piece of equipment, you start to look at it differently. You start to plan for it year to year. You start to maybe even take a look at it in terms of how much I should budget for it. So be strategic. Know your customer. That person that we were talking about who sits at the corner of the bar, of course you know his or her name. And your beer tenders cater to them. They probably have a great relationship, the tips that go back and forth. I get it. I think you need to look beyond your tap rooms. I think you really need to understand how to find customers like the ones that are sitting at your bar somewhere else. Find sources of new customers that haven't been introduced to your beers yet. Because, again, you're going to have an opportunity to cater to the ones that are already in your tap room for a length of time, and then they will leave. They will go somewhere else because there's far too good a beer out there to only be loyal to one brewery anymore. That's not how people buy. So understand your customer enough that you can go after new sources of people who look like them, other geographies. If it's making your brewery a destination, if it's in Lincoln or Omaha, why couldn't Omaha or Lincoln be a source of customers for the other? So think bigger than just the people who are sitting in front of you. What motivates them? What pain points do they have? And what I mean by pain points is, I'm sick of the hazy IPA craze. Okay, well, how do we address customer need that way? What kind of products can we put in front of them based on what we're hearing from them? If we know that the trends are heading in a different direction than my core beers, what am I doing ahead of that before I'm, again, behind it and I'm losing business to other competitors who are ahead of me? I like this example, and I'll tell you why. I think Empyrean does a great job with Watchman, and you're talking about a 6% beer, 58 IBUs, approachable, not overly bitter, very well balanced. Just a hint of the citrus and kind of the floral that I get, not enough to be polarizing for any drinker. I would suggest to you, Watchman does a lot of things because they understand that the customer might not want the extreme IPA. They want an entry point IPA. Again, I don't mean that to be or sound critical. It's actually respectful. I think they got it. They got it right, and it shows. Double that with some iconic branding. It's great. And customers, not only at taproom, but presumably with distribution and retail, they see that packaging and they're like, oh, okay, I'm curious. And what's not to love about a nukchuk? So that it works all sorts of ways for me. I think we all have to be, again, conscious of the story we're telling and the vehicles we use to tell it. Outsmarting the competition, part of what started the conversation with Katie and Gabby was a research project that I did for a buddy of mine. He's opening up a brewery in Council Bluffs, Iowa, right across the river from Omaha. And Marshall and Desi Redmond, they are incredible people, and they want to serve an underserved market. There's nothing right now in Council Bluffs. However you count it, there are probably 18 breweries in Omaha. So craft is growing, craft is needed. Go across the river to Mid-America Center, the casinos, ConAgra, Bass Pro Shops. Like, you got a lot of stuff happening right across the river, and there's the brewery. So wish them the best of luck. Also, a big shout out to Scott Strain, who I met for the first time recently, but good friends with Marshall and Desi, and has been incredibly open with his knowledge and experience to help them get their feet in the industry, which, shout out to everybody, thank you. The one thing, more than anything, I love about craft is the community. People actually want to help each other here. And I mean, at the end of the day, you have to keep the lights on. I completely get that. But to have that sort of open kimono with an established brewery in Omaha for the benefit of a potential competitor in business and a friend personally, I mean, kudos to CrossTrain. So outsmart the competition, all that is a lead up to Marshall calls me and he says, hey, I'm starting a brewery. What do you think? Awesome. What can I do to help? Well, I mean, what's going on in craft marketing in Omaha? And so I put on my marketing hat. What I didn't tell you when I flashed that BJ's Restaurant's assistant brewer picture was that Marshall was my boss. So Marshall is a professionally trained brewer, has had a number of different careers in order to get himself there, including military service. However, once he got there, he became very well known at BJ's before leaving to start his own thing. And I was proud to have worked for him and learned so much. Again, the learning curve on brewing is crazy when you're not in that to start with. He taught me quite a bit about commercial brewing, and I'm proud to call him a friend. He says, tell me about the Omaha market. And so I dug deep, and this is up here. Take it. I brought a copy of this, and there's a full version up on my website, which you're welcome to. Even if you're not in this market, I feel that this kind of a review is valuable. There's a lot of stuff happening right there, and it's small enough that you really can't read it, but it looks smart, so I'm going to pretend. No. My point as a marketer, I go in and I say, how are they telling their story? Right? I'm an outsider. I've been to Omaha a couple times. I've flown through for sure. But how are these 18 breweries in Omaha telling their story? How are they differentiating themselves and standing out from each other? So I took a look at as many aspects as I could, shy of going behind the scenes. I didn't talk to Scott. I didn't talk to some of these other brewers, Nathan at First Street, trying to understand, what's it like to market your product? How much have you budgeted? I don't know that. That's my caveat, my disclaimer. What I do know is if I'm a consumer, here's how I look at these brands. I go from website to social. I take a look at best practices and legal, and I said, yeah, there are some breweries that are killing it. Here are some breweries you should probably take a look at, some of which you've seen examples of in this presentation, and you'll continue to see. And then there are other breweries that have a long runway. They're probably in their infancy when it comes to marketing. So I took a look at a bunch of different aspects of marketing. I gave this back to him, and he's obviously running at 500 miles an hour, but this helps him before he even opens his doors to think more strategically about marketing his craft. He can start out on the right foot. He doesn't have to backtrack after 1, 2, or 3 years and throw on a marketing budget and strategy retroactively, right? So again, what I would encourage you to take from this or take home with you is that you need to know your neighbors. You need to know what they're doing because depending on what voice they're using, they are talking to your very same customer. What's working for them? What isn't working for them? What can you learn? How can you carve your niche so that everybody can, live happily together? There is plenty of room for craft in Omaha, Lincoln, Nebraska, greater. However, if everybody's saying the same message, that's not going to last very long. Think strategically. Budget, what can I say? It's tough. It's tough to have squeezed dollars out of a budget that you may or may not have. However, you need to. It's not a question of when, it's a question of yesterday you should have these kind of plans in place. Call it what you will. Call it a percentage of sales or a fixed amount each year that grows. But earmark some dollars because once you earmark dollars, you're committed to marketing. And that mentally takes you to a different place. You can't say, I'll get to it later. You know what? I actually have budget for this. I need to market my event. I need to market my product launch. I need to be out there in a stronger way. Budgets prompt you to think about marketing, maybe at times that you won't. Which takes us to marketing with intensity. I'm hoping that through the presentation you understand how passionate about craft I am. You're equally as passionate about your brand. There's an opportunity for you to tell that story in a really compelling way, and I can't say that everybody is right now from an outsider's perspective. So I would suggest that you own your brand. It's not about Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. Sierra Nevada Pale Ale revolutionized craft. You could argue that, but they got to a point where they didn't really need to market the green can. The green can was marketing itself. That's not the case anymore. There's a reason why Sierra Nevada has a 50, 60 person marketing team and a budget that corresponds to that. So leaning in and owning your brand bigger than just your product. Customers are going to interpret what you do for themselves. You can give them cues. You can give them hints at who you are with these videos, the transparency we're talking about your statement, your vision, who you are as a brand, your brand story. Those give them the cues, and they say, oh, this is a brand for me because it's very personal and very individual. However, having the consistency at the different touch points, retail and otherwise, the customer experience they have when they go to the tap room, having the team necessary to execute. I'm not talking about 60 people in marketing. I'm just talking about every one of your team members being on board. Everybody knowing who you are as a brand. Tell them, teach them. They're not going to be as invested as you are as an owner or a brewer, but they could be. Give them the opportunity to. Once they are, they will be brand ambassadors for you. They'll execute at tap room. They'll have the customer service that brings people back. Be discoverable. So all these things that we're talking about today help the customer to find you, whereas they might not have in the past. Give your content legs. If it's social media, if it's digital, if it's the press release that you put out about the collaboration you just did, if it's being highly visible at an event, giving back to the community, set your content free. Find a stage for that content because people want to see what you're doing. Again, they want to see who you are. That makes you discoverable. If I'm a 21 to 35-year-old customer, I want to find you for myself. There's pride in that. We all see that. I don't like to use the label millennial. I think it's overused. I think what you're talking about is a younger customer who wants to get the most out of life. They want to have experiences, and they want to share them with their friends. I call that discovery. So there are lots of ways to tell the story. Be strategic about it. Something that I really liked, again, bringing up a cross-train example, what I saw as an outsider from cross-train was a very deliberate content calendar. And they may not have sat in a room and said, we need a deliberate content calendar. Nobody uses those words except for me, but they probably recognized at some point how important content was to telling the story. And when you have the frequency, the consistency of posts, in this example from cross-train, then you're giving people hooks. You're keeping them engaged. As a result, you're increasing their discovery. They prefer you more than they would prefer another brand that is not as active or engaged with them, and they are going to be an ambassador for you and recommend you to others. So, I'm not saying that social media is the only way to do that, but this is a prime example of well-done photos, on-brand content, consistent posting schedule, They want to engage with their customers, and the stats for their socials will reflect that. I'm guessing it does. Be deliberate with your calendar, whatever media you use. Launches, quarterly launches, events. We're talking about free media. This is not stuff that costs money, it just costs time. And then execute brilliantly. Might sound cheesy, but however you do it, just do it the best you can. You don't need high-power marketing people in order to be true, in order to be transparent. You just have to be strategic and deliberate about everything that you do. Now, there's going to be a post that you put up there, which was just you shooting a shot of somebody on a tricycle at the annual employee party, whatever the example, right? Not that I've seen that, but if I did, I'd say, oh yeah, that's fine. But that's probably not what the brand is or what the brand stands for, unless it is. What you really can do is step up all your efforts, use a filter, use a lens of your brand story. Does this employee on a tricycle falling off because they're half drunk after an employee party represent the brand story that I'm trying to tell people? Okay, probably not. If your brand stands for craft in the local Omaha community where the finest ingredients and innovations on classic beer styles. I made that up. But if that was your go forward mission statement, if that was kind of your brand story, we want to give that back to Omaha. Well, that tricycle picture doesn't really add to that. So all I'm asking is use the filter of the blueprints that you've already come up with, the one-liners that define and articulate who you are as a brand. Use that as a set of glasses to look at the posts that you put up, the website that you have, the experience that you're giving people. If it doesn't line up with that, don't do it. You really can't afford to make mistakes nowadays. I'm not issuing this as a threat. I'm just being practical about it. This stuff erodes your brand value. There will be people who see this and think you're just a bunch of, non-serious screw-offs. Sure, you can have fun. Understand the consequences. Hope that makes sense. Again, not a threat, just practical advice. Which, great transition to keeping it legal. Now, when I was at Jim Beam, you have to imagine they had an entire team of legal folks, and every single thing that touched the customer had to go through them. And I was there for 5 years, you just got used to it. Posts, anything printed, any events, everything went through them. And they ran a tight ship because they are a target. If they do one thing wrong, feds jump on them. I mean, we're talking millions of dollars of risk. They are not willing to take that risk. Craft isn't at that point, thank goodness, right? It's self-regulating to a certain extent. We have best practice guidelines from the Brewers Association. How many of us are following those? I would suggest that at least a little bit of research that I did, there's some room there. Keep it above board, because there's going to be a point in time when there's a microscope on all of us, and we don't want to have that conversation. We don't want to have the kind of pop-in OSHA visits when we're talking about our presence in the market for marketing. If we can self-regulate and we can show that we do a good job, then they're not going to bother with us. It's only when they start to see a huge, gross misinterpretation and abuse of the leeway we've been given, that's when things start to go sideways. So please only market where you're supposed to market. People know this, 71.6. I'm not sure why it's 71.6, but this is what they publish. Use an age gate. I know it sucks, but think about it as an opportunity. Boy, that was a positive spin on a negative thing. Think of it as the door to your website, for example. It can still be on brand. It can still be in keeping with who you are. It can't have a lot of messaging because, again, the marketing side of your brand has to exist behind the age gate. However, it can still be a pleasant experience. Make it easy for them to enter their birth date, or at least their year of birth as a minimum. And if it's questionable, don't do it. That's as far as I'm going to go on the preaching legally. But I'm going to say thanks for marketing to adults 21 and older and Empyrean. Great job. Although I would suggest that maybe there's a little bit of tech tweaking that we could do so it didn't prompt you to every page enter your birth date. That's a user experience thing, right? Talk to your web folks or your son or daughter, whoever is managing the website. But there's an extreme, and we have some great examples of breweries that are already doing this. But as you said, as I told you before, I looked at 18 breweries in Omaha, so there's a little bit of runway for other breweries who might be able to put an age gate in front. And then corporate social responsibility, it's easy. I see it as a please drink responsibly message. And we've got a couple examples of this. Lucky Bucket and Nathan, if you saw the presentation yesterday on storytelling, the Be First Class. Yeah, that was clever. I like it. I appreciate it for two reasons. One, the marketer in me says, yeah, they're thinking about who they are as a brand and how to reflect that. Two, even in a legal, quick throwaway footer statement on their website. Obviously, it stands for more than that. However, put a responsible drinking message, whatever that is. Drink responsibly, please drink responsibly, keep your head about you. Whatever your message, whatever is in keeping with your brand, use it, put it up there. Again, if we self-regulate, they won't regulate for us. And so I'm going to end with just a nod to the beginning. I really challenged you to think about craft differently. There's an opportunity to think about business to customer, business to consumer, which is obviously what you're interested in. How many people can I get through my tap room? What do my sales look like? What kind of distribution do I have? How do I look at retail? What's my canning strategy? And then there's the opportunity to look at your partners, like hop growers. How do I market myself to them? How do I really look? What would I be like to work with? Would a hop grower want to have a long-term relationship with me? What kind of position do I take? How do I look? So look at craft marketing in a very similar way. Look at it a little differently than perhaps you did in the past. It's not about putting marketing in just one bucket. It's about using all the tools that are available to you, most of which are free, using them to your best advantage. So my key takeaways: you can't go wrong when the customer is at the center of your world. It's trite, you hear it a lot, but the customer is obviously the reason we're all in business. And so if there's a trend, if there's somebody sitting at your tap room counter, if you see something, take note of it. If you understand the customers better, you're going to give them better service, better products, and also, you'll also be ahead of the game when changes come and the trends change. Sometimes you have to press the reset button. Maybe your brand story is not resonating. Maybe it's not working. Maybe first 2 years you kind of struggled to get the foothold in the market that you wanted. Take an objective look and ask yourself, is this story the right story? Is this line of products? Am I too sour? What's the trend? What's the taste preference? I love these beers, but maybe my customers don't. Just be honest with yourself. But that's tough for a lot of us because we have a lot of pride, especially as brewers, right? You started a brewery. You left corporate world, you started a brewery. It's a dream. It's not everybody's dream. If you get to a point where it's not working or you're starting to see sales or traffic down, be very objective about why. Go further to reach lookalikes. We talked about this a little, but just as a reminder, your taproom customer is not going to be there forever. Understand, size them up, understand who they are as a person, what makes them tick, and go find other people like that. Spend your marketing dollars, if at all, very strategically to go after people like that elsewhere. Always look for new sources of people. You need to be thinking ahead of your current surge of traffic. Think about when it dies down. You don't ever want to get to that point. Always be looking to the new customer, as well as, of course, your beer tenders and taproom staff servicing the existing. And then act now in a very cheesy infomercial way. We can talk strategically, but I completely appreciate what's going through your minds right now about strategy versus day-to-day business. Completely get it. All I'm asking you to do is to do something. Do something marketing related. Understand how these things can work for you and just knock pieces of it out. You're going to be happy that you did 2 to 3 years from now when you're still in business and you're growing and thriving. So with that, I am done. I certainly appreciate you folks. I might have time for a couple questions. Katie, yeah? Awesome. This was a lot. So tell me what I missed. Tell me what you just think is off base. Challenge me. Sure.
I have a question on the age gate. I just really don't get it. I mean, television commercials don't say don't watch if you're not 21. What's the purpose of the age gate? Help me out.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a great challenge, honestly. And everybody knows that you can fake your age through an age gate. It's just because we're a self-regulated industry, these things have been suggested so that we make it as difficult as possible for someone who shouldn't see the marketing content of our brand to see it. We can't, the only thing that we can do with a liquor commercial on TV is go by the stats that we get from the producer of the commercial or what you see from the NFL on the Super Bowl. You have to base it on stats. We can go one step further, and we should. We should actually put that in there because at some point we're going to be required to. So even though people can game their way out of it, it's a best practice that helps keep us self-regulating. I know I kind of talked my way around that question, but it's just something that we need to do. Yeah, I hope that helps. Anything else? And yeah.
On social media, how much content and how often should we be putting content on, say, Facebook or Instagram or any of it?
Yeah, great question. Question was, how often should we be posting to any of the social media? And I think it's completely up to your brand. I'm not saying that there's a best practice. I like to see twice a week at a minimum. I think that we as a brewing community have something to say twice a week that is worth sharing. And it starts to establish a pattern for us. If it's you, if it's the brewer, if it's the beer tender, we just get into a routine of looking for shareable moments, which I think is more valuable than a strict, we have to post and check that we had to a week. So you're going to find your right rhythm. I only suggest that you find a rhythm and you stick to it. Consistency is important with these folks because as soon as you stop talking, they're listening to somebody else. They're not going to stop listening because you stop talking. Good question. Good.
What would you say is a good balance between kind of the behind-the-scenes sort of stuff, like what brewers or staff is doing on a day-to-day versus event promotion and true, like, marketing as opposed to storytelling marketing?
And by that, do you mean paid marketing?
Yeah, or like you're talking about social media when you're talking about posts like that. What's a good balance to strike?
Yeah, so the question being, behind the scenes versus more outward facing marketing. What's the right balance? And I think that people want to see the behind the scenes. I think they want to know, and studies have shown that they want to see what a brand is, and a brand that puts up a face of marketing without showing who they are as people, new customers are seeing through that. They're looking for a deeper relationship with the brand. And the pretty polished side of your brand is not always as interesting as how you got there. And you had to dump a batch of beer, and you had a super bag full of whatever that bust. Whatever the case may happen, you don't want to necessarily publish the challenges or failures, but you're human, and people connect with human brands. So I would lean more, percentage-wise, I'd put more eggs into a basket of behind-the-scenes transparency. 60-40 probably. Good question. Plus, it's a little easier to do because it's a camera phone. You see a lot of polished advertising nowadays. It doesn't have to be. I'd encourage you, if you're interested at all in the Omaha market, most of you are part of it, grab one of these sheets, grab a card. I'm happy to answer any questions even after the conference. And I certainly wish all of you the best and continued success. And thank you for taking the time.